Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Hidden Treasures. I'm your host, Jim Cousins, along with the president of the Historical Society in Hopkinton, John Palmer, who brings you really interesting stories and artifacts from the Historical Society. And today, we have part one of a two-part series where he's going to be telling you about a fascinating book that exists at the Historical Society. Welcome, John.
Welcome, thank you.
I'm so excited to listen to this story.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. I'm kind of excited to tell it because I know a little about it and I've learned a little more, and it's a very interesting story.
Excellent. Let's go.
So the name of the story is Early Life in Hopkinton. This is a true story of the everyday life in Hopkinton. It was a rural town that took place in the early 1800s. The various events, persons, and places that I will describe come from the book entitled Brampton Sketches that was written by Mary B. Claflin of Hopkinton in 1889, and it was published in 1890. This is not a book review, as I make no mention of Mary's writing style, and there are many subjects in her book that I have not included. My sole intent is to speak about those subjects that seem the most interesting and that are about the life of our early forefathers. If you would like to read this book, the entire book, we have a number of copies available for loan at the Hopkinton Historical Society. Our buildings on Hayden Row Street in Hopkinton. Why Mary chose to use the name Brampton Sketches as a substitute for Hopkinton is a mystery, or why she chose to use the word name Brampton is a mystery. She doesn't explain her reasons. Perhaps Brampton might have been a nickname that was used at that time. However, she does include a prefatory note that I want to read to you. It says, "I have a vivid remembrance of the conversation, the stories, and the appearance of the elderly people of my own village in my youth, and of what then remained in manner and customs of the ways of early times. These brief sketches are a faithful record of such memories, transcripts, as literal as they are simple, of what I thus learned of the life of a New England village 80 years ago. To me, it is clear that Brampton Sketches is not a work of fiction, but a true story of some of Hopkinton's history." Who is Mary B. Claflin? Mary was born in Hopkinton on July 31st, 1825. She was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Davenport and was a granddaughter of Dr. Thomas Buckland. Her full name at birth was Mary Buckland Davenport. On February 6, 1845, at the age of 19, she married William Claflin of Milford in a church in Hopkinton. Her full name at marriage thus became Mary Buckland Claflin. William Claflin, her husband, was a prominent industrialist, and he devoted many years of his life to local and state politics. In 1869, he was elected as the 27th governor of Massachusetts. When he was governor, William and Mary lived in Newtonville. It was there that she got into the inspiration to write Brampton Sketches about life in Hopkinton, and also to write another book entitled Under the Old Elms, about her life as the wife of a Massachusetts governor. So what we have here is the situation that she wrote the book in 1890, but it was about the 1820s when she was living in Hopkinton. and I'm guessing people called this place Brampton, but I don't know. But it's clear that it's a true story. You'll hear the names of some of the people, you'll recognize them. So anyways, Mary dedicated the book to her grandfather, Thomas Buckland, the good doctor of Hopkinton. Jim, do you know the name Buckland?
It really does sound familiar, yes.
On the old maps of Hopkinton, downtown Hopkinton, there are huge blocks of property called the Buckland Estate.
Okay.
And one of these properties is the Davenport house, and Mary lived there.
Okay.
I believe it is the house that I formerly lived at. So
I see.
that's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
to
very
me.
interesting.
That kind of led me to work this story into Hidden Treasures.
Right.
It's not really a treasure. Well, it's a treasure in a sense.
It's a total treasure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, Mary died in June 13th, 1896 in Northbridge, and she's buried in a cemetery in Newton. This is a photo of the cover of the book Brampton Sketches and an image of Mary. I believe the house on the book's cover is where Mary grew up. Today it's 87 Main Street. The book opens with, the first section of the book is an abbreviated explanation of the origins of Hopkinton. And it begins in 1697. An English gentleman by the name of Edward Hopkins died, and he bequeathed a substantial amount of money to Harvard College with conditions attached to the gift. And it took more than 10 years for these conditions to get resolved. But in 1710, Harvard finally invested a portion of the Hopkins bequest into thousands of acres of pasture lands on the highest hill between Wachusett and the sea. The territory purchased was named Hopkinton in his memory. And to support the investment in these pasture lands, Harvard leased various parcels to tenants for the sum of 1 penny an acre per year, with the tenants being responsible for the payment of the property taxes on their portion. So the lessee tenants were poor farmers, and they had trouble keeping up with the rent owed to Harvard and with the property taxes. And delinquencies were commonplace and troublesome to resolve. So to address this financial problem of the underperforming leases, in the year 1732, the Massachusetts General Court enacted a law that required $10,000 to be withdrawn from the state treasury and paid over to Harvard in full settlement, satisfaction, and discharge of the entire debt owed to it by the tenants, and that Harvard was required to convey to the tenants all right, title, and interest in the leased lands. The General Court also provided that portions of the land be set aside for use by a minister for upholding and propagating the kingdom of the Lord Jesus Christ in New England, and for a school. So this is how Hopkinton got its start in life. Every time I think about this, I am amazed by the scheme that was used. What do you think about this?
I think it's really amazing. So they were getting 1 penny a year per acre, and then the state gave them $10,000.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to imagine, like, the state now buying something, and then it turns into whoever was leasing the land.
Yeah.
Just gave them the rights to it.
But this is the land on top of the hill
Yeah.
in Hopkinton. We were the highest place in the county, and it was barren land. Nothing was there,
Yeah.
and they had to get rents from it. They spent part of the bequest of Mr. Hopkins,
Yeah.
and so they wanted to get a return on that investment.
Right.
And so they came up with this idea of leasing it to tenants.
Yeah.
Tenants would get to use the land, parcels of it, and
Yeah. And that probably is because I think Mr. Hopkins put in his will that the money to Harvard had to be spent to, as you said, propagate the faith.
faith, yeah.
And they were probably thinking that's how they would do it. I don't know. That's
So-
unique. I've never heard of that before.
Well, anyways, it didn't work. So the state bailed Harvard out, gave them $10,000, which I'm sure was a substantial amount of money,
Yeah.
and bought Harvard out. Harvard got paid. The landowners, or the parcel users, the tenants, got the land,
Yeah.
and Harvard was free and clear of this. The tenant landholders became taxpayers of Hopkinton, so
Right.
Hopkinton had to deal with it.
Yeah.
After that,
I wonder if they were paying less than a penny an acre per year.
I don't know. I don't know. But anyways, that's how we got started with from nothing, barren land to people.
Yes.
So the house of worship, there was only one house of worship at that time. And it was a 2-story wooden structure, unpainted, with double rows of windows, and without any spire or ornament of any kind. There were no trees nearby for protection from the weather. There was a graveyard beside the building and a row of sheds behind it. But from the outside, the building had no resemblance to a house of worship. Actually, the building was named the Meeting House. It wasn't even named the church. It was named the Meeting House because it had a dual purpose. It was a church on Sunday, and it was like the equivalent of a town hall on the secular days of the week. This is a picture of the Meeting House as it looked in 1805. This image should be familiar to everyone today because it's the centerpiece of the town seal, the seal of the town of Hopkinton. Inside the Meeting House were an array of pews on each side of the pulpit. Certain seats were reserved for the deacons and others for the choir and the bass viol player. The bass viol was the only instrument in those days that was considered suitable for use on Sundays. The hard of hearing were allotted seats beside the pulpit. There was also a high gallery all around the Meeting House where the people of color, the paupers, and any strangers were required to sit. So you had to go upstairs if you were one of those categories. This gets really interesting. The church services were held every Sunday in 2 sessions of 2 hours each. What do you think about that?
That's a long time.
Yeah,
4
certainly
hours
is.
on a Sunday.
The morning session never varied. It always started with a long prayer in which the minister always mentioned the sins of each of the church members.
Individually, do you think?
Yes, individually, mention their sins.
Wow.
So that's
kind of harsh.
Yeah, that's tough. I'm glad I'm not a member. Deacon Lowe always conducted the choir, and he made sure that every stanza of the selected hymns for the day was sung. So you couldn't take a break. You had to sing the choirs. So that's your 2 hours, sermon and singing. That's morning session.
Wow.
The best time of the day was the noontime break between the first and second halves of the preaching. The women usually brought their lunch from home and ate it while chatting with their neighbors. But not so much about the minister's discourse, but more often about the arrival of a stranger in town, or a new courtship among the young people, or the arrival of a new calf, or the killing of a pig, or the sickness of so-and-so, and similar type of thing, gossip type of talk. The men gathered in groups of their own on the sunny side of the church near the horse sheds and talked about their own personal affairs. They talked about town politics, the state of the crops, various other mundane topics. In Hopkinton, or in the town, there were three important people: the minister, the doctor, and the lawyer. The minister at that time, and this was in the 1920s, was the third minister of the church, and he was the Reverend Nathaniel Howe. And he served as minister from 1791 to 1837. And as the minister, he played the most important role in the daily lives of the townspeople. Reverend Howe was known and admired for miles around for his quaint originality and free speech. He always blessed the town children and never passed a child without expressing some pleasant word with a friendly pat on the head. His annual salary was $333.33, which was always paid to him by the town treasurer on a particular day of the year. Everybody in the parish in those days was taxed to support the minister. Political feelings usually ran high in the little village over the election of the selectmen, the town treasurer, and the pound keeper. Those were the big jobs: selectman, town treasurer, and pound keeper. And their feelings were strong and bitter. And the parties at that time were the Whigs and the Tories, much like today are the Democrats and the Republicans. And then it was the Whigs and the Tories, and they did not see eye to eye about anything. So that part of life hasn't changed, just the name of the party.
Right.
Anyways, the Hopkinton was located on the Central Turnpike. I'm not sure you're familiar with the Central Turnpike.
Isn't that Route 9?
No, that's the Worcester Turnpike.
Oh. No, I don't know.
The Central Turnpike was a road from Boston to Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
And we were on it. It was one, and I say turnpike, it wasn't like a paved highway.
Yeah.
It was a path.
Okay.
A gravel road. But anyways, we were midway between Boston and Worcester on the Central Turnpike. And there was a tavern in the town where the stage coaches with their great teams of horses would stop, and where travelers could put up for the night. And it was a low, rambling stone building standing close to the road, halfway up Meeting House Hill. It still stands today and is easily recognizable. So
the Stone House?
The Stone House, yeah.
Yes.
It's a stone house.
Yes. Very cool.
Yeah. High up on the rocks of a huckleberry pasture was a rude stone building where powder was stored during the Revolution. This place was called Powder House Hill, and it was the furthest limit where the village children could stray because they feared the Indians would catch them if they went beyond that point. To my knowledge, the building does not exist. I've been trying to prove that it exists or not, and I could not find it. So I'm concluding it does not exist. After the minister, the second most important person was the good doctor of Hopkinton. His name was Dr. Buckland, and he was the good doctor. And he had a stately bearing and a genial manner and was loved by all the townspeople. Everyone regarded him as a friend. There was not a boy who would fail to make his best bow in his presence, and not a girl who would not honor him with her prettiest curtsy. He would travel over the rocky, hilly roads on horseback as far as 50 miles to minister to a poor child for whom he would receive no pay. For the well-to-do farmer, he would charge $1 for a night visit, and for a day visit, he charged 50 cents. The first schoolhouse in the town was situated opposite the meeting house. One of the initial actions of the selectmen was to appoint a school committee man who would hire a schoolmaster and several school dames. Their pay was 5 shillings each per week for the number of weeks that the town's appropriation lasted. So this was a situation where they wouldn't budget for the whole year. They would budget for, I don't know how they did it, a period, three weeks or 3 months, and there would be enough money to pay the teachers for that period, but there was never enough money to pay for the whole year.
So when the money ran out, the school year was over.
School year was over. Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Yeah, it was different.
Very different.
The same concept, but we're more refined today.
Yeah.
Anyways, inside the schoolhouse was a teacher's desk that faced the door, and around the sides in the first row were the seats of the older students, the elder scholars we call them, or Mary called them. The second row was devoted, was devoted to those in the next lower age, down to the small benches where the littlest ones sat. When it was their turn to recite their ABCs, they all stood up and formed a perfect row with their toes exactly on a straight line. To an outsider, their posture seemed much more important than their spelling. And it probably was, I don't know. The schoolroom was warmed by a large fireplace that the older boys took turns in tending. Every other minute, one of the students would ask permission to go either near to or away from the fire. Those seated near the fireplace would roast, while the children in the back of the room would be nearly frozen. So they swapped positions for a while. The village farmers would take turns in keeping the woodpile well stocked. In the summertime, the children used to climb and play on the woodpile as a form of gym exercise. The course of study, the structure of the school, included reading, writing, spelling, arithmetic, geography, and the first part of Barrett's grammar. I don't know what Barrett's grammar is, but it must be some kind of a book on grammatical grammar. The school committee man always visited the school at the close of the term, and the children were carefully trained for this visit. On the day of the visit, the school committee man would ask the children to stand up tall and to speak in a loud voice and answer this particular question. Who was the first president? A few would correctly answer George Washington, but others would say it was Christopher Columbus, or it was General Cornwallis, or someone else. So to show his superior knowledge, the committee man would then say, "Children, didn't you ever hear of the story of George Washington, of how he went out with his little hatchet and cut down his father's cherry tree? And when his father asked him who had done it, he spoke up like a man and said, 'I done it with my hatchet. I cannot tell a lie.'" Then the school committee man would say, "Now, children, always remember that George Washington was the first president of the United States because he never told a lie." What do you think of that one?
Yeah, that's a famous story even nowadays.
Yeah.
It's interesting that it was famous back then as well.
But the reason that the committee man was trying to use was George Washington, you should remember George Washington because he never told a lie. Not because he led the war, Revolutionary War, or was elected, but because he never told a lie. I got a big kick out of that.
And you know, I mean, this is like the 1825s, 1830s. You know, it wasn't that long ago that he was the president.
You know, we've got the 250th anniversary of the United States coming up next year. I mean, I've been reading and seeing in the newspaper articles about the 250th. So, yeah.
That's really fascinating. We'll have to break here because that's the end of this first episode. And please come back next month for the second part of this show, talking about the book, Brampton Sketches. Thank you, John.
Great. You're welcome.